Welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This is episode 127. I hope you are having an amazing week. It felt like a million years this week, but I hope it's been an amazing week for you. Episode 127, Season 3, Episode 18. Portion of the week is the portion known as Mishpatim, where the Bible really feels like it moves into very much a legal document. Mishpatim, law. Our subject for the week and our topic for the week, following the majority. As I said, I hope you're having a great week. I hope things are going beautifully and wonderfully for you. Let's dive in. We know a lot about the idea of following leaders, following the majorities, doing what other people are doing. But I'm curious at the outset just to ask the following question. Can you picture in your mind a moment when the majority was telling you to do X and you decided to do Y? Where the social pressure was heavy and you didn't bend, and you didn't break, you didn't follow the majority. You followed your heart, you followed your gut, you followed your own intellect. You followed your own reasoning, you followed your own logic. I'm not speaking about cases necessarily where it's ridiculous, where the majority is clearly and wholly in the wrong, or it's absurd to follow the majority, the proverbial jumping off a bridge kind of idea. But even in cases where there is reasoning both ways, and the pressure is the reason for you to jump sides, and you hold fast to your opinion, where you didn't follow the majority, where you didn't jump on the bandwagon. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. And so the Bible gets into this in the 23rd chapter of the book of Exodus in the 2nd verse. The Bible there tells us a number of things. First, really important, you shall not follow the majority to do bad. So the concept of following the majority right away has a limit. We don't follow the majority to do bad things. We don't follow the majority to do things that are really antithetical to who we are as human beings. To give it an example, the fact that there are 1 million cows and goats and sheep that eat grass doesn't mean that we should go out into the pasture ourselves as human beings and start, foraging for greenery in the same way that they do. I'm sure they couldn't be wrong. It's not how that works. But even in much more dangerous circumstances, the group of people decide to go and loot a neighborhood, decide as a majority to break down the doors or into the homes of other people. So in that case, you don't follow the majority to do something bad. The specific example that the commentaries talk about, the Talmud talks about, is much more in the space here in this verse about courts and judges in courts, how that works in terms of following majority, when you do follow majority, when you don't follow majority. So how many, what's the separation does it have to be for the majority to actually rule? And so the example that they give is if the following case, you have a court of, let's say it's 23 judges, and it's 12-11 to sentence the person, let's say, to death. 12-11 to sentence them to death is not enough of a majority. Interesting, here's another caveat limit of the rule. It's not enough of a majority to warrant the punishment. But if it's flipped, where the majority of one is in favor of saving the person, we do follow that majority. So in the spaces of doing something bad, we don't follow the majority. That's one. And the space of the verse continues, and the verse continues and says, and you shall not respond over a dispute to tilt after the many. And so you shouldn't then also in the court, in the manner of many cases in courts and situations where the court is already in the majority, or you see that a court is in the majority, you shouldn't just sort of flip and join the bandwagon, to jump on the bandwagon simply because the majority is already there. You should hold to your opinion. You might lose, but you should have your opinion. You should voice your opinion. The commentary Rashi here brings the idea that in those situations, you shouldn't ignore your opinion and the minority, but in fact, if you believe strongly in what it is that you think or your reasoning, then, and if someone asks you, you should share it. And as he says very, very bluntly, you should allow the yoke and bear the burden of false judgment to fall on the neck of the wicked majority. Meaning, we don't always have to follow the majority. We don't always have to subject ourselves to groupthink. We don't always have to cave to the social pressure. In fact, we probably should never actually cave to the social pressure. And so this very much falls into the space of something that's known as the bandwagon effect. The term the bandwagon, jumping on or jumping off the bandwagon as a term, comes to us actually from the 1848 United States presidential election. In that time, there was an actor by the name of Dan Rice. I looked this up because I was curious as to where that term came from, since it's an odd term. During that presidential election, an actor by the name of Dan Rice was trying to garner support for Zachary Taylor. And he used the term that people should jump on the bandwagon, that they should get on board with everyone else who's supporting Zachary Taylor. It helped, perhaps to a degree, propel Zachary Taylor to the presidency, and it became a term du jour and something that we use on a regular basis. So, jumping on the bandwagon effect, and how we should think about or not think about with respect to our own lives about following the majority or following our intuition, or what we might call following our gut. We talked at one point last year or the year before about intuition and developing intuition, what that means to have intuition, what it means to follow your gut. If we have enough time, we'll get to one specific example here today, but I'm not sure we will. But the bandwagon effect is this idea that by virtue of pressure, right? It's a virtue of pressure is a cognitive bias for us. This is the official definition that causes people to think or act in a certain way if they believe that others are doing the same. And so the reason why someone is going to act and do something is because that's what most people are doing. The majority of people are doing. I'm going to follow that crowd to where they're going. That's the idea. And so we have to be mindful of it. We have to pay attention to it. Social pressure is a very serious and legitimate thing. The ability to change people's minds simply by virtue of social pressure. Take elections as an example. We won't get too political here. We've tried to never do that. But take the last set of elections that you might have experienced wherever you may be, and think about how those conversations that you have with other people went around voting for candidate X or candidate Y. And the feeling that if you voted for a certain person, then you are identified or tagged a certain way. And the social pressure to conform, to not follow that, it's extraordinarily powerful. It changes elections potentially. It changes the direction of policy. It changes the direction of behavior. And so following your gut or standing against the majority is not only hard, but it can be incredibly dangerous. From a biblical standpoint, take the example of Noah standing up against the rest of the world. Now, he didn't stand up so much publicly, but by building the ark and acting the way he did, that's not following the majority. Abraham, setting out on his own path, revolutionizing faith and religion in the world under the idea of monotheism. So that sort of spiritual entrepreneurship, which I wrote about and spoke about here in this space the first year of Coaching with the Bible, that takes a lot of backbone. That takes a lot of, fortitude, inner fortitude, belief in self and in one's own thinking. That goes diametrically opposed to not just the majority, but everyone else. Everyone else. And so we can appreciate, though, on the other side of that, why people would jump on the bandwagon. If you're living in a city and their sports team is doing well and you root for somebody else, maybe you jump on board for that season because you want to be part of the crowd. You want to belong. You want to fit in. It feels good. Why do I want to stand out? Why do I want to be different? I don't want any of that. So conformity for itself isn't necessarily bad or good. The ability to conform and to belong, to be part of the group, to be a part of a winner in some cases, it's what a lot of people want. But at the same time, in a lot of other contexts, it's simply just following the norm. Norm, as Paul Wilkins points out, Paul Wilkins is a coach, a consultant, super interesting dude. Norm is short for the normal. In business, it would be the industry standard. In life, it would be the way in which all households go. But it makes the point that if we want to do extraordinary things, we can't just do normal or ordinary things to get to extraordinary results. Most people don't get to extraordinary results. As he says it, 3% of the population gets to achieve extraordinary things in their lives. The other 97% work for them. And so we have to sort of appreciate how this develops and how we have to do this. He even has the statement that the majority is effectively always wrong, especially when it's talking about high performance and extraordinary results and achievements. The majority is wrong. You will not get there if you follow the path of the majority. So, we have to sort of think about how this works. How do we get to this? What do we think about the bandwagon effect? How do we avoid it, really, right? How do we avoid it? How do we get to a space where it's not something that's impacting us? Because we have to appreciate that, again, the majority not only isn't always right, sometimes the majority is flat wrong. And sometimes what the majority believes is a lie. There's a great quote from Booker T. Washington: "A lie doesn't become the truth, wrong doesn't become right, and evil doesn't become good just because it's accepted by a majority." It doesn't make it easier to stand against it, but it also doesn't make what they think or what they believe to be true. Or as another quote that I saw, which I think was anonymous, and I can understand why, sometimes majority only means that all the fools are on the same side. And so I'll follow the majority, except when the majority is wrong. And in Paul Wilkins' case, the majority is always wrong. And so it's an indictment on the majority, and also a push for a person to follow their own intuition, to follow their own gut, to do what's best for them, to do what's right for them. And so the question then becomes for ourselves, so if I'm experiencing the bandwagon effect, or it's something that I see going on around me, what do I do with that? How do I operate around the majority? How do I operate and hold back from sort of naturally or easily falling prey to the bandwagon and falling prey to the majority and not holding to what it is that I believe? So I saw this great article on a blog called Effectiviology is the name of the blog. And how do we avoid the bandwagon effect? So the first thing we have to appreciate is that with every bandwagon situation, there are what are called bandwagon cues or social cues, biasing cues that move us into the space of following the majority or following the crowd. So if it's an advertising or if it's for a product placement, right, they're going to put celebrities, or they're going to talk about the numbers of people who have bought the most recent iteration of phone. So I have to be able to pay attention for the cues. And the first thing is I have to create distance. So here we're talking about avoiding the bandwagon effect. I want to create distance from the cues. That could be physical distance. That could be emotional, psychological distance. And this allows you to not immediately give in to the peer pressure, to allow yourself to make a better decision. As a result, or correlatively, is to create an optimal environment where you can make better judgments and better decisions. So non-impulse is one way to sort of think about that as an example, or outside of the realm where the groupthink is strong. Separating yourself from the pack, giving yourself a quiet space. allowing yourself as a third idea is to slow down how you're thinking about something or what's triggering or driving you to think a certain way and to understand the cues in that which is driving. So bandwagon effect, or the ability to stand against the bandwagon effect, the ability to hold fast to one's own thinking and logic and reasoning, very much requires a person to simply slow down. To allow oneself the space to understand how it is they think, what it is that they think, holding themselves or ourselves accountable for their decisions, and not simply just excusing it by virtue of saying, well, the crowd was going there, so I was going too. And then if we want to go further, is to examine that bandwagon specifically. What about that thing is interesting to me, is enticing to me, is pulling me in to the space where I maybe perhaps want to be in there and be part of that group, such that if it comes up again, I can be stronger. I can, hold stronger. I can be better prepared in advance what that is. And there are a lot of different ways to sort of do this. This takes a strong person to sort of hold against the majority, to not follow the bandwagon, to trust their gut. Because in many cases, in our experience, I'm sure, is that by not participating, by not joining the crowd, we get ridiculed or we get made fun of by being nonconformist, dressing differently, beat of our own drummer kind of thing. The social stigmas that potentially can attach to a person are many and large and hard and difficult. And if we're not strong, it's hard to continue. And so we have to sort of be able to, again, analyze it, slow down, watch the spectrum of it, and then perhaps the most important thing here is really to consider alternative options. What other course of action can I take here that allows me to be me, that allows me to hold to my, in this case, minority opinion, but also doesn't give me, I don't lose face in front of other people. We could be, I wouldn't call it sleight of hand, but very careful with our words so people misinterpret or misjudge and misunderstand what it is that we're saying and allow them to think what they want to think about what it is that we're saying. That might be one way. I'm not sure that's best. But we have to think about alternatives in these spaces as opposed to simply just taking it, which also is an alternative in these spaces. But that's the power of the bandwagon effect. That's the power of the majority. That's the power of social pressure. And so we have to appreciate then perhaps the most important thing. For us to become the people we want to be, to achieve the extraordinary results that we want to see in the world, we most often cannot follow the crowd. Because if we follow the crowd, we'll simply get to where the crowd is and go no further. And to finish with a great quote from Albert Einstein, the one who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. Those who walk alone are likely to find themselves in places no one has ever been before. We've been quoting Einstein a lot lately. I think a lot because he fits and falls into a lot of these different spaces. He's certainly, from a thinking perspective, certainly in science, people are with their own theories and their own hypotheses and things that go against the grain, that go against the norm, that go against the majority, that don't conform, puts you as an outcast. That perhaps in many cases, that for the better part of one's lifetime, century, and more, they're ridiculed until they realize that they were actually right. And so it's upon us to sort of think about this as we come to the end of Coaching with the Bible for this week, is to consider those different circumstances and situations where we followed the majority, where we jumped on the bandwagon, where we did conform. Consider for good or for bad those circumstances, those situations, and then steel ourselves, prepare ourselves, and ready ourselves for perhaps the situations where the bandwagon is dangerous, precarious, and not good for us. And be ready to follow, perhaps in some cases, a minority of one, that one being ourselves. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. Look forward to seeing you next week.